Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's Rseat is a copy and paste combo that we've had before, but with a recent addition to the Group 3 class, we now have a dual meta. With that said, I have a perfect anti-meta. Let's get into it. The anti-meta car of the week is the 2020 AMG. Without any real standout features, the AMG is pretty much just above average in absolutely every category. Both the meta cars are incredibly dominant, but the Porsche is a little bit easier to drive, so you're probably going to see a lot more of them on the leaderboard. You can see that it's almost all 911s and BRZs. I was the second fastest AMG with a 121.276. As you can see, Win had a little bit faster, and that still puts me at 75th place. As you start your lap, I want you to stay close to the left until you go over the crest, and then you're going to track out to the right looking for the number boards. When you see the 3, where the line is at the 3, right before that, you're going to hit the brakes. Braking as heavily as you can in a straight line, I want you to start turning in right before you get to this white line. The key to hitting this double apex corner is making sure you carry speed beyond this very first apex. You do want to be close to the sausage curb, but you're going to continue bleeding speed all the way to the point where you get right in between the two sausage curbs. At this point, you're going to shift up to second gear, attempt to hit the second sausage curb, or get close to it, of course, and then fully accelerate out in second gear. Be very careful not to induce any oversteer that will kill your momentum. From here, move all the way to the left and try to align yourself on the curb before you get to that 2 number on the side. Right after this drainage ditch here on the left, that is when I want you to hit the brakes. Using light brake pressure to bleed off speed as you drop down to second gear, you want to get as close to this sausage curb as you can, and as you can see, I kind of missed it. So when I got on the throttle right next to it, it pushed me all the way out almost into the dirt, and I had to correct a little oversteer. From here, we're going to stay on the curb, and we're going to look for the number boards right in between the 2 and the 1, right in the middle of those, and we're going to brake lightly, turn in, continue turning in as you bleed off speed all the way to the sausage curb, making sure not to touch it, and then fully get on that throttle. Get on that throttle gently, but you do have to get on pretty quickly. If you do dip your tires in the dirt, it's not the end of the world. Moving to the right, once again, we're going to use all of the curb. We're going to look for the 2 marker, and at this black mark on the white line right before it, that's when I want you to hit the brakes. Turn in before the end of the curb, and what I want you to do is downshift to second as fast as you can and get off the brakes. You want to apex just after that sausage curb. This was actually a little bit too late. You've got to get off the brakes fast so you can keep as much momentum going up this hill and get on that throttle as early as you possibly can. In my opinion, this corner is actually the toughest on the track. Right at the number 2 board, you're going to brake very gently, turn in, downshift to third, and wait until you get next to the sausage curb before then getting on the throttle. You want to make sure you're adding steering all the way to the point where you're getting on the throttle and continue steering to the left. As long as your left tires are touching the outside curb, you should be fine. After lining up in the curb to the left, you're going to look for the 4 number marker to the right, and right as soon as you get all the way past it, you're going to hit the brakes. Aiming to put your right tires all the way up on the curb. Once you get onto that curb, you're going to notice that there are some tire marks leading off of it, and that final tire mark will tell you exactly when you want to start turning in. You should be in second gear as you turn in, dipping down to first gear after you get off the curb, and you should actually use more curb than I did right here. Since this next part of the corner is a completely blind crest, you're going to have to use clues in the distance to tell you exactly where you are. You can see these 3 trees right here, and then there's a gap until the next tree. That gap is essentially right to the right of where the curb is going to be. I like to be in second gear using just a little bit of throttle until I know exactly where I am, and as I dip down, I then add full throttle and continue to steer to the right. It's much more important to carry a lot of speed and momentum down the hill, so rather than sacrificing that exit to get all the way to the right, you're going to try to get as far to the right as you can, but you're going to switch direction as soon as you get under this WeatherTech bridge, even if you're not all the way to the right. Once you turn in, you're then going to start lifting off the throttle. You can see here I'm almost entirely off the throttle, but you're going to see me add a little bit more once it starts playing. You don't need to use the brakes as long as you turn in at the right time, and you just need to modulate the throttle to make sure you get as close to that sausage curb as you can, and then get fully on the throttle as you pass it. Get to the left side of the track before you get to the white part of the curb, and as soon as your entire car is next to it before the red portion of the curb, that's when I want you to hit the brakes. You only need light brake pressure and to drop down to third gear to slow down the car enough to get yourself all the way next to this sausage curb, of course, again, without touching it, and you want to get on that throttle as heavily as you can as you pass it. Of course, not too heavily and not too sudden, but you got to get all the way on it. Getting to the right as soon as you can, right before the 3, I want you to hit the brakes heavily and move all the way up onto the curb. Waiting until you get to the 2, you're going to then start to gently turn in second gear, then down to first gear and get off the brakes before you get to the apex, back up to second gear and heavily on the throttle, but not too heavily because any oversteer here could either spin you or just completely kill your momentum. Of course, you want to use as much of the track as you possibly can, which means going up on the curb, but you've got to get back on the track before you get to the green part. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is when they approach turn 1, they try to slow their car down as much as they possibly can before this sausage curb. Then they find themselves just crawling to the next one and then trying to get on the throttle. It's important that you hit the lowest speed as you're braking into that corner in between the sausage curbs and then immediately get on the throttle. You can imagine it as kind of a V shape, just making sure you hit both of those sausages. The last 2 corners should not at all approach full braking. This next corner is going to be a full braking corner, but you should actually brake a little bit earlier than I did, turn in a little bit earlier. That'll allow you to keep a little bit more speed and get off the brakes sooner so you can carry more momentum up the hill. The trick to this corner is carrying as much speed as you possibly can and getting on that throttle as early as you can. However, if you make even a slight mistake and you touch that sausage curb whatsoever, it's probably going to make you fly off into the sand. It's really difficult. You just have to be really careful. The corkscrew is a lot of fun in my opinion. It can be tough, but if you use all of the clues and you just get used to the corner, you'll eventually know exactly where you can exit. And the fact that it's blind isn't going to be that tough once you really get used to the shape of the corner. Because of the camber and elevation change, it's important to make sure that you do not use full braking. You do want to use full braking here, but you actually want to turn in. Don't go for a super late apex on that corner. You want to make sure that it's a gentle curve and not just like a sharp 90 degree. You got to carry speed in, but you also have to get on that throttle super early. This is the type of race where only one tire compound is provided. You of course have access to the wet and the intermediate tires, but since it's never going to rain, you don't, of course, need to use those. So you just have to use the mediums, and you do have to take a pit stop. That does not mean you have to take tires, but pretty much any of the cars that can do this race without taking tires are still going to suffer from enough tire wear that it doesn't really make it a viable strategy. The basic strategy is pitting somewhere around the middle of the race. Since it's 14 laps, it's pretty easy to devise that you want to pit on lap 7 for essentially equal stints. Once again, I'm going to plug my video where I discuss different tire strategies and I tell you exactly why or why not you would want to use a specific tire strategy. But one of the really unique things about Gran Turismo is it uses multipliers in lieu of really long races. This race features 3 times fuel usage and 6 times tire wear. That way you can imagine that essentially everything that happens to your tires is actually happening to them 6 times. Every lap you do is actually 6 laps worth of damage to your tires. The fuel weight of a car does affect how much damage the tires take, as well as all of the dirty air, which there isn't much of in this race because of the custom slipstream, and all the battling that you're going to do closer to the beginning of the race because the field is usually a lot closer. So if you factor all of these things in, you're going to have a lot of fuel weight, you're going to have a lot of traffic, you're probably going to be battling with people, and all that stuff is going to damage your tires a lot. Once you've done 7 laps, however, you're essentially going to be 21 laps of fuel lighter because it is a 3 times fuel multiplier. I've decided to leave that in. I said multiplier for no reason. You guys are going to make fun of me for it, and it's worth it. Anyways, by the time you get to your second stint, assuming you do pit on lap 7, you're going to have so much less fuel that it's going to do a lot less damage in your second stint, which means that you could make your first stint a little bit shorter and end up with better pace for the entirety of the second half of the race because the fuel will continue to deplete. So while it makes sense initially to think that if you split it in half and you do 7 laps for your first stint, 7 laps for your second, that you'll be pretty equal, but in reality, you can do a longer second stint and actually maintain better pace throughout the entirety of that stint. There are, of course, other factors. In the type of race where you just need to go in the pits and not actually change your tires, I always advise trying to go in the pits when no one else is going to. That means if you're at the front, you wait as long as you can. If you're at the back, you try to go in as early as you can. And if you have a pack of people in front of you that you think are holding you back and you see them going in the pits, you do not want to go in the pits at that same time. If you do find yourself behind a pack of people and you're able to determine that they're going to pit maybe a lap or 2 later and you can safely go into the pits at that time, then you could end up getting an undercut because you come out with newer tires. They're going to be on old tires, as old as they possibly can be, and the pace differential is going to be pretty crazy. When you're out doing your out laps, they're going to be at the end of their stint going really slow, especially if they're battling, and so your undercut can work really beautifully. However, you have to be very careful because if you go in the pits really early, by the end of your second stint, anyone who went to the pits later is going to have much better tire wear, and if they encounter you, it's going to be much more difficult for you to fend them off or defend or anything like that. So a quick summary of everything we went over. It makes sense to pit right in the middle of the race. It's probably faster overall if you pit a little bit earlier than the middle of the race, and you definitely want to pit when no one else is pitting. If you can pit before them, you're going to have a benefit at the beginning of your stint, but you're going to be vulnerable at the end of your stint. With all of that said, most people are going to be adopting a very similar strategy. I don't think I've seen anyone go in earlier than lap 4, and even that is probably not the best idea. I've seen people go in as late as lap 9, and of course, again, that's not the best idea. So most people are going to be pitting at pretty similar times. Because of that, it's going to be inevitable that you're going to have to make some of your moves, if you are going to be making moves, on the track itself rather than relying on your strategy. It's because of that it's really important that you educate yourself on the various characteristics of the two metacars. I do believe you're going to see a lot more Porsches than the BRZ, because the BRZ is so incredibly difficult to drive that you'll see even the best drivers in the world making huge mistakes, spinning out and crashing. The 911 isn't going to be as good on tires because it's not as light, and it's not going to be as insanely fast through all of the corners, but it still is really fast through the corners, and it has incredible acceleration. While the BRZ is going to suffer a lot on the final corner, the one that leads to the start-finish line, the 911 is going to be incredibly fast there. So I definitely suggest not trying to pass a 911 when it comes to the final corner. Places like the corkscrew right here, the corners leading up to the final corner, or the middle section after turn 1 are good places to try to pass either of those cars, really. At the end of the day, it's going to take all of your skill and all of your know-how to try to pull off moves on pretty much any car, but of course against the meta car. And the AMG is really interesting because it's just really good at everything. It's not incredibly good at anything, it is just really good at everything. It's got better than average power, it's more nimble than the vast majority of the FR cars. It's not quite as nimble as the MR or the RR cars. It's really good on the brakes. I'd say that the tire wear is a little bit above average. The gearing is really good for the track, so it's just a good all-arounder. And because of that, it's just kind of reliable. When it comes to the race itself, obviously the meta car is going to have some distinct advantage over the other cars. There really is a reason that the meta cars are the meta cars and that they do as well as they do on the specific tracks where they're good. What I want you to consider, however, is this. Despite the fact that the cars are going to be better, the meta cars are going to be better, you can perform better than another driver in the meta car, and that's really what it all boils down to. If you find yourself in a race with people who have similar qualifying times to you, then you can definitely beat them, even if they're in the meta car. For one, you never know how much time it took someone to set a lap, and you definitely don't know how much of it was luck-based. It's a much different thing setting a single really good qualifying time than it is to be able to do that repeatedly in a race itself. And once again, I'm going to plug one of my videos. The secret practice strategy to getting really good in these races is practicing the cars in the race conditions themselves. Obviously, you can do that in the race, and if you do this race enough, you're going to get used to how your car handles and feels in the race. And if you practice enough and you focus on consistency rather than just nailing one incredibly good lap, you may find yourself beating people who have outqualified you, and you may find yourself doing that consistently. As I talk about a lot, time trial conditions are static, and they do that on purpose to make sure that everyone has a fair shot at the qualifying. Gran Turismo is really the only sim that I know of that has no fuel in the tank, static wind most of the time, and no tire wear on during the time trial. And as soon as you introduce those factors to some people who don't practice the race pace itself, their ability to drive kind of falls apart. So if you focus on actually practicing in the race, even if you're in a car that is definitely not as good as the meta car, that can make all of the difference. Now, I believe I've talked quite enough about everything relating to the strategy, so we're going to talk about what's happening in the race itself. Now, I was right behind Frank. He had a really good exit. I decided to bump draft him because I actually wanted to put him next to Garizona. No offense to Garizona, I just wanted to beat both you guys. When you can provide a bump draft and you can choose who you bump draft, you essentially have two options. If you know that one driver in front of you is much faster than the other, you can give them the bump draft. If you're not quite sure about their pace, you can bump draft whoever is going slower to try to keep them next to each other. And if they're constantly battling, that might give you the opportunity to take one or both of those spots. Garizona is an absolute gentleman, and he gave Frank all the space Frank needed to take that outside pass because I did give him that extra momentum, and then he just went ahead and let me have it because Garizona is a sweetheart, and I believe he values having a clean race over a good position. Either way, Garizona, you're a real one. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you very much. In a situation where you have then separated two people who are battling, that's going to give them the disadvantage of having to defend against you without being able to rely on any slipstream, unless of course they catch the people ahead. Frank made just a little mistake. That corner is also very, very tricky, and Velosa was also able to pass him on the other side, and that gave both of us the opportunity to then break free, and we had a lot of space between ourselves and the next person. It took about a lap and a half to catch Monkey Man, and I happened to catch him right before we went in the pits. There wasn't anyone close in front of Monkey Man, but I did have Velosa behind me. I saw Monkey Man go into the pits, and for a second I thought I might try to go and take one extra lap on these tires, and hopefully I could potentially overcut Monkey Man, but then I was worried, since Velosa is a very fast driver, that if he went in the pits at that time, he'd be able to undercut me, and in the end, I might not gain the position on Monkey Man. I'd definitely lose the position to Velosa, so it actually made a lot of sense just to follow Monkey Man into the pits. Since I knew Monkey Man wasn't going to have anyone to slipstream off, that meant that I was going to be able to attack and he wouldn't have any extra help. And in fact, it also meant, with Velosa right behind me, Velosa is definitely going to choose the person that he thinks is the fastest to try to bump draft if he does decide to bump draft. So I felt confident in the fact that if I was to get in a battle with Monkey Man, I might actually get an assist from Velosa. Of course, these types of things can't always be relied on, especially for everyone in every split, but once you start making relationships with people, if you're racing enough, and if you want to get good, you should be racing quite a lot, then you can start making decisions based on these things. Now, obviously, it's not going to be a guarantee that Velosa is going to want to help me. He might want to just take advantage of me and Monkey Man being in a battle, but I was pretty confident that if Monkey Man and I got in a battle, Velosa would help me rather than him, and then, of course, it would just be myself versus Velosa, but either way, we'd be ahead of Monkey Man. Monkey Man had done a really good job of maintaining pace and keeping up his composure, but he made one little mistake right there, and I was able to capitalize it by getting right next to him going into this corner. Of course, I gave him space, he gave me space, didn't collide, and like I had predicted, Velosa went ahead and gave me the bump draft. That allowed both of us to get in front of him, so then we could potentially work together, or at the very least be free of him, and then we could battle and try to each of us get 5th place. It took another 2 laps, but we were finally able to get to the next group of people. I encourage you to watch the radar on this because it's pretty wild. It looks like CTAI accidentally hit Trusty Steed and then immediately slowed down, putting himself in the middle of the track to allow us to get by and not cause any other incidents, as well as making sure that Trusty Steed still maintained his position. I don't think CTAI did that on purpose whatsoever, and by slowing down, he was showing that he didn't mean to do that, and of course, he was trying to make sure that he didn't take advantage of something like that. But because of that, Trusty Steed was able to continue, and Velosa did get in front of CTAI, but I was able to get clear of everyone, and then Trusty Steed continued to battle Velosa. I ended up benefiting from that greatly. It was at that point that I realized I was fairly close to Big Floppa, but I wasn't quite sure how fast he was going to be. Fast forward about 1 lap, and I was able to catch him by about a half second, but of course, that wasn't quite enough, and I was going to have to do a lot of work to get close enough to actually benefit from the slipstream. Whether it was because of better tires or just good old-fashioned driving technique, he was able to keep me behind all the way to the very end of the last lap. The Z4 has good tire wear, a lot of power, and pretty good traction, but it doesn't quite handle the twisties as well as the AMG, and because of that, I was able to get right on his bumper, leading into the final corner, but going into the end, I wasn't quite able to make any kind of move. I had seen him understeer a little bit and run into a ramster, and I don't think he did it on purpose, but I was wary enough to think that if I went on the outside, I might get spun, even if he didn't do it on purpose. So instead, I tried to pull off a little bit of switchback, but he was smart enough to park it on the apex, and he drove cleanly, drove fast, and I was only able to get 3rd place. With all that said, I want to show you what our friend Rod, who is in one of the meta cars, probably the most powerful meta car, what one of the best drivers in the world can do when they are in the good car. He was a full 18 seconds ahead of 2nd place. Good job, Rod. You're amazing. Thank you for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, I'll be making another one of these guides next week. To finish off, as always, I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members. I love every one of you. Thank you very much.